Okay, great. All right. Okay, fabulous. Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Herb Kim, and I'm the founder of a conference that's taking place next month called Thinking Digital. It'll be our 14th edition. And I've been a very proud member of the Northeast tech scene since about 2002. And it's great to be here for tonight's Northern Data Debates. Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, is this our first, the inaugural Northern Data Debate? And a huge thanks to the, I was known as Nick D, but Northern Center for Innovation and Data? National Data, sorry. I've got to memorize these lines better. And it's great to be here, and great if you've not been in this room before. This is, of course, the Catalyst, and it's a wonderful new space for hosting events like this. So we've got a fairly action-packed 60 minutes. We have 6 panelists, 2 of whom are patiently waiting online to make their contribution. And before we proceed then, let me just do a quick run-through of our panelists for tonight. So first off will be Cheon Wara, who hails from Wall's End. Mother is also from Newcastle. Father studied at Newcastle University Medical School. She studied electrical engineering, and her last job before joining full-time politics was as head of telecoms technology at Ofcom. She was elected as the Labour MP for Newcastle Central in 2010, and just to make sure I get these titles correct, she was previously the Shadow Minister of Industrial Strategy, Science and Innovation, and currently is the Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, and as I mentioned, she'll be joining us remotely. Talia Baldwin, a little bit further down, but here with us, fortunately in person, is the Director of the Geospatial Commission in the Cabinet Office. And the Geospatial Commission, for those wondering, is an expert committee setting the UK's geospatial strategy and promoting the best use of geospatial data. Her pioneering record, though, continues previously to that. She established and led the Treasury's digital policy team, where she was responsible for the approach to public spending on digital technology and infrastructure. Sitting next to her is Rich Harris. Is it okay to call you Rich versus Richard? Okay, fabulous. Professor, and this is quite an interesting title, of Quantitative Social Geography at Bristol University, which I hadn't realized was a thing, but thank you. No. It's mostly my arguments, but I'm certainly keen to learn more. Yeah, he is a fellow of the Turing Institute, which is, now just if so I'm clear here, is the Turing Institute a sponsoring body for tonight's event? So, fabulous. So great to have you here. His expertise lies in spatial and computational methods for understanding social differences, exclusion, and segregation. His recent work has been in urban analytics and cartographic visualization of administrative data sets to analyze the geographies of COVID-19. Wow. Very interesting and very relevant, certainly of the recent past. At the end is Dr. Henry Kippen, the Managing Director of the North of Tyne Combined Authority. Previous to this, he was Director of the West Midlands Combined Authority. So we look forward to your notes comparing and contrasting the two regions. He was responsible for, his work is involving inclusive growth, public sector reform, climate change, and digital. His background also includes work in public service reform and the Northern policy landscape. Here directly to my left is Fiona Matthews of Newcastle University, Professor of Epidemiology and Dean of Research and Innovation in the Faculty of Medical Sciences. In addition to her expertise in epidemiology, she also has a focus on aging and health, as well as the role of universities and research in understanding and mitigating regional inequality. Our final panel member is also online, Urvashi, if I'm hopefully I've got their pronunciation correct, Parashar, the Deputy Director of Evidence and Analysis in the Department of Leveling Up Housing and Communities. And I'll have to be honest with you, I only recently learned there was a Department of Leveling Up Housing and Communities. They support communities across the UK to thrive, making them great places to live and work. She is a professional economist by training, with a deep knowledge and expertise in economic appraisal and cost-benefit analysis, policy evaluation, and industrial economics. Urvashi is an expert on analysis and evaluation of regional and spatial policy, and will also be joining us online. So to kick things off, we've asked each of our panelists to speak on tonight's theme with a short intro, and then afterwards we'll go to more open questioning, both for myself as well as from yourselves. And so with that, could we beam Chi onto our screen to kick us off? Chi, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Fabulous. We'd love to hear your opening thoughts, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. And just let me absolutely start by saying how much I wish I was there in person. And then also I may have to leave sort of quickly and unexpectedly. I'm actually coming to you from Parliament, and I am waiting for bills of the Nationality and Borders Bill to come from the House of Lords, and we'll be voting on the House of Commons, and that might happen at any sort of time. And Parliament is prorogued, long French word just to mean the session ends first thing tomorrow, so everything's got to be finished tonight. So if I unexpectedly leave, I'm very sorry for that, and I'm very sorry I can't be there in the Catalyst, which is a fantastic location in the National Data Center, which is great to have in the city as well. So leveling up in data, which is it's kind of like a thing that nobody knows what it is, leveling up, and can it be helped by something which is, everything, if you like, data. And so, having, leveling up is it's a bit of it's a marketing slogan. I think talking about, let's in good faith say that what the government is trying to do is to address regional inequalities. And data, in terms of, the reason I say that data is kind of everything is because our lives take place so much, online, digitally, and ones and zeros become data so much easier. And I always like the quote of Florence Nightingale, who should be better known as the inventor of the science of statistics, who says, you must study statistics. It is only through statistics that you can understand God's intentions. Now, I'm not talking about that in the religious sense, but I do take that as meaning that it's only through studying data and statistics that you can actually understand what is happening. And if it can't be measured in a way, it can't be assessed. And I do think that's true, even if we kind of living in a world which is, well, for some, including our Prime Minister, I would say, post-truth. And the Prime Minister has repeatedly been not fined, but reprimanded for misusing statistics. But I start by saying that data, understanding data, is important for addressing just about any issue, any challenge. But when it comes to regional inequalities, and those of you whose memories go back to 2010 and the abolition of the regional development authorities, that led to an absence of data collection, good data collection in many areas. And we've seen this, for example, in the knowledge exchange frameworks, which are used to encourage universities to be at the sort of center of regional economies, is something that's one of Labour's objectives, but we don't often have easy access to the data, or any access to the data for how regional economies are doing, what's driving them, what aspects of them are growing, etc. So I think we need to have the sources of access data. There's so much sort of data, to put it in about it, so much data out there, but actually what we need is sort of credible, authoritative information. And getting that is a challenge. And having access to the data which is credible is made particularly difficult by the absence of a coherent framework for the collection and sharing of data safely and securely. And that's something that we've been campaigning for, I'd say just about since I came into Parliament in 2010. But we still haven't got a set of digital rights. We haven't got a set. There's about last time we looked, there's about 800 different ways of sharing data across government. We saw that, particularly, if you like, with health data and the care.data scandal, and then the more recent concerns about it. We've got the Goldacre review, which was published recently and makes some progress. But again, that's for health data. It's not. We haven't got a coherent way across government of sourcing, sharing, and protecting data. And GDPR is clearly not fit for the age of big data. It protects privacy, not data rights. But I think the Northeast particularly has a significant role to play in helping to address that. I was very impressed by the Great Northern Health Record and the principles associated with that, which is about collecting and sharing health data in a way which empowered people, residents, my constituents, and gave them power over their own data rather than having it as something that is kind of a requirement imposed on them. And so the answer, I guess, to the question is yes, data can help with leveling up, whatever that is. But a lot of work needs to be done to ensure that that data is collected effectively, used ethically, and shared productively. And I think the different data research institutes in Newcastle University in particular, so the Centre for Data, the National Innovation Centre for Data, the Urban Observatory, and Open Lab, most of which I've visited, can help shape data in an ethical way for regional and national leveling up. And again, the Urban Observatory in Newcastle, which is a long-standing collector of data across our city, is a good example of how that kind of infrastructure can be put in place and maintained. We also need to develop architectures for how we store and share the data that is collected. And I'm concerned that Palantir is apparently being given a contract to develop a federated data architecture for the National Health Service. But I think that I did some work with Newcastle University Business School, I think back in 2015, about data architecture. So, for example, if we're looking at children in poverty in the Northeast, of which we have far too many, it's got significantly in the last 10 years, being able to share the data about children between local authorities, the health service, the Department for Business, etc., in terms of working families, DWP, that requires that sort of all the issues that I'm raising here about collecting data securely and with the right kind of empowerment for those data being collected, sharing it in a way which empowers people rather and doesn't break data privacy. All those issues are raised there. So and those are the kind of issues that I hope that Newcastle University is looking at. And I think it's one of the issues that we have to be fundamentally addressed before data can be used effectively in supporting leveling up, whatever exactly that is.
Chi, thank you very much. Since there's a risk that we may lose you before the end of this event, I'm going to break format for a moment and just ask you a couple of quick follow-up questions, if that's okay.
Yes.
There are two, and I'll mash them up, and you can answer them as you please. One is there data that we aren't collecting or aren't collecting well that would help us understand what the challenges are in leveling up better? The second question would be, since obviously there are some big question marks for you as to what leveling up means, are there specific things? Would there be a first or second thing on your list if you were in charge of executing a leveling up policy that you would be doing with urgency?
Well, those are great questions, and I could actually spend like half an hour on each of them. So I'm going to try and be. I think enough time already. I'm going to try and be brief. So in terms of what we're collecting, well, I mean, I think sort of there's so much data we're not collecting. I'm looking right now at whether how small businesses are or are not applying for research and development tax credits, because I believe fundamentally that research, research and development science that can drive regional economies which are independent, if you like, and not dependent on handouts from central government, that we need to have a skills-based, high productivity regional economy. So I want to know what small businesses are applying for research and development grants and what sectors they're in and where that's going. It's very difficult. It's really difficult to get that data. The data is based on where the businesses may be headquartered. It doesn't always sort of flow through supply chains, etc. That data is there, and if we had a data, it's like a coherent data framework which gave businesses confidence to share data, and incentives to share data effectively, that could provide so much powerful information as to how we should be, perhaps driving or funding different aspects of Newcastle University's research, etc., to engage better with local economies, what those local economy needs are, what kind of courses we should be looking to support, particularly access courses or retraining as jobs are being hollowed out from certain sectors. So there's a lot of data that's out there, as I said to begin with, but it's not sort of being collected in a way that is accessible or secure or credible, and we haven't got a data framework to enable us to do that. We've also got we've got sort of no follow through of knowing, for example, how those who say do A-level physics, how that impacts what they earn really and what sectors they're in, except there's so much data that we could that sort of the data age means we could use ethically and effectively to drive policy. I believe in evidence-based policy, but and it's not that it's not there, it's just not being collected in a way that is trustworthy and credible and can be shared. And then, so your second question was about what would I address in terms of leveling up?
Yes, that's right. If you were in charge of the leveling up agenda, what would be top of your list?
Well, I think you've got to let me do that in a short term and sort of a long term. Like I said, I believe that for the Northeast economy to be, or any regional economies to be high wage, high productivity, high skills, we need to be driven by science and research. So one of the things that I would address is the current huge disparity in research and development funding, which means that in the Northeast, so I think outside of London, Cambridge and Oxford, gets 45% of research and development funding. The vast majority, so the concentration is in the southeast, and the Shared Prosperity Fund, which is replacing the European Union structural funds, which were much more distributed. Shared Prosperity Fund isn't doing that. Isn't actually even focused on or doesn't seem to reflect research and development. So in the long term, we look at research and development and science funding. In the short term, though, we've got to address child poverty and health inequalities, and and those are looking at support for working families and again, sort of health and data is needed in order to be able to address health inequalities. So that's not quite a totally concise answer to your question, but a short and long-term objectives.
Chi, thank you very much. Hopefully you can stay with us to the end of the end, but if
All
not,
right.
thank you for your contribution so far. Right. Moving on. Next, we'll start with Fiona Matthews, if that's all right. And Fiona, are you okay to present? Or
I'll
will
stay
you
and
will you
try
stand?
and
Okay,
wave my
fantastic.
arms from here. Yeah, yeah. I was told I'm not allowed to pace. I'm used to pacing while I talk, so do apologise for the waving and the pacing. So some of my comments are going to be similar, but to use data to help us reduce inequalities, we need to have a collective decision on the definition of measures that we want to use and what we want to monitor before we intervene, and then we need to stick with them. I'm a statistician by training. I do apologise. And I'm constantly frustrated by the quality of the statistics that are quoted that wax and wane depending on the point of view of the person and the point they're trying to get across. And if we're going to really be serious about levelling up, we can't do that, because otherwise we can have the narrative that we want in a number of years' time. So just quite by chance, I also chose poverty as something that I wanted to mention. So take, for instance, poverty. There's already two measures of poverty, absolute and relative poverty. And people will switch in the same sentence, in the same discussion, just to make their points. And we can't do that if we're going to think about making a difference. So if we're going to be serious about measuring and reducing inequalities and using data and data science, we need to know whether data is reliable, easy to collect, timely, and then we need to use define measures and think about what we need and what we want to monitor. So one of the things about inequalities and the levelling up agenda is those hidden inequalities that we just don't have. How can we use data to model inequalities if complete groups of individuals are absent from our data completely? So take, for instance, it's known that homeless individuals are missing for an awful lot of statistics because they don't have a home. If you don't have a home, you can't have a location. If you don't have a location, you're not stamped into the data set. But that's one we know about. I mean, what other hidden inequalities are out there that we need to think about for the levelling up agenda that we just don't know? To be able to monitor trends in data, it's required to not cost a fortune. It can't bankrupt the country to model the levelling up agenda. We need to be able to have this data that is linked together. And at the moment, our data quality is as I say, a pretty poor across the piece. If we're thinking about the linkage of locations, the health locations, the regions for the health are different to the regions for the government. So those two systems don't even talk to each other on the same location basis. So that makes us thinking about, when we're talking about a levelling up agenda, if we're talking about a health levelling up, that's a different region to if you're talking about the economy or something else. So inequalities will take decades to reduce and remove. So we also need to think about the fact that the data and the politics around the data and what we use often has a very different timescale to what we will need to monitor and look forward to. We need to make sure that the monitoring and the reduction of inequalities is not political. It's going to take longer to do that than within any political cycle, no matter what your political inclination. And so we need to remove the politics from the monitoring of data for the inequalities. And by doing that, we can create and understand metrics that will enable us and the next generation to look to see what's happened. To date, inequalities in health is what I spend a lot of my time doing, life expectancies and mortalities, and they've mainly, the inequalities have widened, but that's not mainly from the fact that the more deprived groups have got worse. It's because the least deprived groups have got so much better. And so actually, if we don't understand that, we need data to be able to explain that as a process. It's not that a certain group of individuals to date are going backwards. It's that some others are going so much further, so much faster. So we also need to think about this not just from the UK. National and international data will also allow us to think about policies for levelling up, policies for reducing inequalities. And so we need consensus not just at the national level, but an international level to enable us to fast track some of those understandings so we can use the data and the data science to reduce the challenge of the messaging and the status quo. So I return to poverty. At the moment, it seems like we're playing pin the tail on a donkey, but the donkey is moving, and sometimes it's a pig with a very curly tail. We can't do that with data. We need to be able to have a clear message that we can stick with, that the data collectors know what it is, the data processors know what they're processing, and the data analysts can understand it. Without that, we can't make a clear message from the data. So we need to decide on the important metrics. We need to stick with them. We need to collect the data and share it to enable critical evaluation of the decisions and what's happening with the trends. And perhaps then we stand a chance of knowing how we are doing and what we can change in the levelling up agenda.
Thank you. Rich, are you up for going next?
I seem to be sitting rather than that, but so the question of what is levelling up. So I'm a geographer, so let me paraphrase Bill Clinton's advisor, whose name escapes me. I mean, it's geography, stupid. I mean, that's what it's about, right? That's what levelling up is about. It's the recognition that in some places the opportunities available to you are different from other places, and then asking the question, why is that happening? Why is it happening in a meritocracy, or it's supposed to be a meritocracy? And then, of course, immediately raises questions about measurement and therefore data. Measuring why people live longer here and seeking explanations for that. And in my most positive side, a part of me, it was actually Theresa May who studied geography at Oxford, not Boris, but I'm quite pleased that the government's rediscovered what would appear to be social and economic geography 101. And I am pleased, and I'm pleased with the opportunities that brings. But I still think a part of me, this is just, even my most optimistic side can't quite drown out that slightly cynical voice that says, but we've been here before, a lot, many times. It's dating back since about the 1950s, at least onwards. In fact, if you were to look at the Levelling Up report, you will actually see the reinvention of levelling up under lots of different titles. So I think the question, to my mind, is, what's changed? What is it that's going to make a difference this time that failed on all those previous attempts? And to put the weight of that change and that success purely on data is, I think, a big ask, although I very much hope that data scientists are successful in that undertaking. I think I'm done.
Thank you, Rich. Talia, would you mind picking up from that rather heavily dropped mic?
Yes, I would love to. I'm going to safely, in opening remarks, situate the government's policy for location data within the priorities around levelling up, and to have an opening caveat that the organisation that I'm with, which is a bit of the Cabinet Office that sets that advises the government on how best to maximise the value from location data and how best to improve it. We're not responsible for setting levelling up priorities or delivering those either. However, it is true that location data has become more prominent, especially over the last couple of years, and people have recognised, strangely newly recognised, that it is incredibly useful for doing a bunch of different things, including mitigating the impacts of the COVID pandemic, but also that it's very much more prominent in things like the future of transport strategy, planning, energy security strategy that's just recently been published, and of course, levelling up. So to bring it back to the data, I suppose, and to hopefully support a kind of conversation about what can and can't be done, I think from a location data policy perspective, we tend to look at how improvements to location data can support levelling up through two different kinds of lenses. The first lens is about baselining the data that we have linked to location to make sure that when the government does decide to design and deliver different priorities for improving regional inequalities, it can test how well those are being implemented. So my job in government is to work with other bodies that are responsible for measuring those impacts, including the ONS. And at the moment, we're working with Ordnance Survey. So the Geospatial Commission has the contract with Ordnance Survey that supplies all of the public sector with its core location data. And we're working quite hard on improving the specification, including for providing data at very local levels, so we can sensitivity test, for example, the impacts on health outcomes of particular measures that are supporting levelling up or anything else. So there's the kind of baselining element of it. The second lens through which we look at location data in the context of levelling up is thinking about location data's place in delivering measures that will affect positively regional inequalities. So in the Geospatial Commission, we're doing a range of different things, including a number of projects to improve the UK's access to underground asset data. So if we decide that we want to deliver infrastructure across the UK to support lots of things that local economies want to do around improving road networks, transport infrastructure, that kind of thing, fixing gas leaks, we can do that quickly, efficiently, and there's benefits across the UK because we've got a common standard system and there's a framework for accessing that. We're also having a look at things like better access to property attribute level data and more innovative use of transport location data to fix public sector challenges. Those are just some of the projects we're working on at the moment. So I'm hoping that through the location data lens, we might be able to have or integrate a conversation about exactly what a coherent data framework looks like to support levelling up.
Thank you, Talia. Henry,
Yes,
how are you?
I'm okay. That's quite an astonishing array of perspectives so far, isn't it? So I'll keep this
We're
quite
cramming a
brief
lot
and
in, yeah.
attempt to add. So I had three quick things to say, some of which have been touched on. First is about the relationship between data and devolution. So I am a devolution geek, as you would expect, given my job and previous roles. I think there's a spectrum of, I suppose, ideas about what devolution could be. On the one hand, it's about shifting stuff from the centre to the locality. It's a bunch of financial transactions. It's more or less money. You can see levelling up through that lens too. At the other end of the spectrum is where it gets really exciting, I think, which is about the future of the region and a bit of imagination and who's telling the story about where our region is going and what the evidence base is that underpins that. What are we investing in? What are we trying to change? To paraphrase the great opening comments around the impact of poverty and inequality in the region, solving those issues are fundamentally cross-sector challenges, and I think we have a job to make sure that our story and our narrative around devolution is matched by a sophistication of data and our understanding and use of that. Otherwise, the devolution experiment will always be more transactional than it could be. So that's the first thing. I think that's actually really important and quite underdeveloped. And by the way, there's no levelling up really without stronger devolution, is there? Because, you know, who defines what levelling up should look like? I mean, it has to be us, doesn't it? It has to be us. You can't level up from Whitehall, as the cheesy phrase goes, and I think that happens to be true. So you know, there's something about the relationship between data and devolution there. I think secondly, it's worth me saying, with a public sector hat on, not a politician obviously, but our ability to innovate and do different things and change our behaviour off the back of new data and insights. It's a bit of a mixed story, isn't it? You know, I recall some really fascinating work I was involved in 10 plus years ago in Lambeth and Southwark in South London. We were just talking about living in that part of the world earlier. A big piece of work, social network type analysis, which looked at what do young people need leaving college to get into work or closer to being into work. The evidence told us after a load of work that we assumed would tell us about the quality of back to work services, about the kind of courses that they were on, about their proximity to employers. Actually, the biggest determinants were, have you got a smartphone? Are you anywhere near a good Wi-Fi connection? Have you got an alarm clock to get you up in the morning? And do your mates have a job? So what did the public sector do? What do we as a public sector do off the back of insights like that, which are qualitative rather than quantitative, perhaps? Not enough, in my view. So the kind of public service reform and public service innovation piece closely follows a better understanding of what data is telling us. And then lastly, I think it's an obvious point, and you as chair know this more than anyone else, in this region, if you look at where our future jobs are coming from, if you look at the things that are going to drive our economy, they are data-rich sectors, aren't they? Net zero and the spectrum from offshore wind to carbon capture, hydrogen, battery tech, manufacturing the next generation of EVs. All of those industries are absolutely data rich. If you look at the growth of the digital sector and the speed of that recently and the extent to which that gives us potential in the city and elsewhere, they all rely on data in one form or another, and then, you know, step back, look at what drives city and regional performance across the world. It's human capital, isn't it? So the skills to be able to take advantage of those opportunities and to be able to use and manipulate and understand the world around us and do that in a way that drives our economy is, I think, 101 for what we need to achieve in the region over the coming years. So I will leave it there. Not quite as heavy a mic drop, but, you know.
Thank you, Henry. Urvashi, are you still with us? Hopefully we haven't lost the connection.
I'm here.
Oh, you can hear us. Fantastic. Well, hopefully you've been able to hear the other contributions, and would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you to the panel so far for all your, insights. Just a bit of a reintroduction as well. I led on all the analysis and the evidence in the Levelling Up white paper. I was part of the task force, still am looking at delivery. So you can blame me or applaud me for the 100 pages of chapter 1 and the technical annex with the missions and metrics, which is also what I led. So being a lowly civil servant, and as you rightly said, this has been visited and revisited many times. My team and I, we tried our very best, along with Andy Haldane, to make a difference here. And so I just wanted to say a few things, snippets from the white paper and what we are practically trying to do to improve our understanding of data in the context of levelling up. So for those of you who did manage to open the white paper, data is, and along with evaluation, was one of the 4 main pillars in how we should be rewiring government. Rightly, it's not rocket science, but we clearly said that it's not just about it's just not just about central government or local government. It's also for the public to understand where they are and how they are getting affected by outcomes. And the issues with data in the context of spatial disparities is not just about not having the right level of geography, but it's the frequency, the timeliness, the coverage across the UK, and some of our understanding of emerging and future drivers. So the white paper said that we need to focus on better data collection, and this is where we've been working very closely with the ONS and others through their subnational data strategy. Better access. So again, my department, the Department for Levelling Up, is going to do a whole program of work with local government and the ONS to improve data access and platforms. Data visualization, where we've been talking to many experts and new forms of data, including Talia, who we've spoken to as part of the white paper, and learning and insights. I think this is really important, that you can't just have beautiful data out there. What are we actually doing with it, and how does it connect to policy? And the final thing is all our work now in embedding an architecture for delivering on the missions. And the missions are underpinned by metrics. So I think one of the panelists was saying, it's really important to understand what would we measure. So we had a go at identifying what would be a starter for defining the 12 missions and how would we measure and track them. We also committed to statutory reporting on the mission, so that will force us to go back to the public once a year and say, this is how we are doing. And these are the metrics we are going to be using. So a lot of work is going on in the department and with all the relevant lead departments for the missions to define them better and have plans for measuring them and tracking their progress. I'll stop there, but very happy to take questions.
Great, thank you. And if Chi is with us, then perhaps we could have her join us both on stage. I don't know if Chi is with us or not. Right. So I guess the first question, really, I guess, to the panel and to Urvashi, is I mean, there's a lot for me as we sit here today to thinking about. There's a ton. I guess there's on a practical level. First off, because clearly a lot of data out there. Some have argued that it's not actually very useful or accessible, and there's a lot to be done there. Let's assume that yes, of course, we could have more data. Yes, it could be better organized. It could be better. I guess what I'm wondering is there's two things. There's a practical question: is there an obvious area to any of you where if we had more of X data, or that it could make a massive difference in terms of informing policy that it just isn't being done today, whether that's on, if you will, the policy end or at any end, really. And I don't know if anyone wants to start with that in terms of a Rich. I'm not surprised.
So one of the things that's come up a few times is this idea that levelling is about regions, and that's not strictly true. It is about regions because there are clearly regional inequalities, but actually, as the report itself identifies, it isn't just about regions. And if you just focus on regions, you miss the deprivation within affluent areas, and equally, vice versa. So I think one of the challenges is actually about having data that scales well. If you fix this on a particular scale, you'll miss something. You've got to operate at multiple scales at the same time. And you've also got to find a way of doing it that's geographically contextual. So it seems to me a lot of the failings traditionally is the idea that you have one-size-fits models or you have one-size-fits-all measurements. And that doesn't work in a world that's diverse and varied. So it's about having data that's geographically granular, but also can scale in particular ways and can appreciate context. And that is quite a challenge, but it exists, and we're getting there. I think the challenge is about using that data and you'd expect a geographer to say this, but you're kind of in geographically sensitive ways.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Henry?
Apologies, a fairly unsophisticated point, but I'm not sure it is about having more data necessarily. It is about being able to work between the lines and across the silos, like in government language. So they take an investment in this region. For an example, investment in this region, Northumberland line, which will go from Ashington into Newcastle, reopen a railway line. The impact of that is what? On passengers, on young people getting to college or work and back. There's a social impact there, there is an economic impact there, there's a housing impact there, there is a well-being impact potentially that you would want to set out as you are making the case for investment in those things. We're still quite undercooked, I think, across government as a whole, but also within the regions in terms of being able to understand, approximate, measure the impact of what we are doing in a holistic enough way to then make the case back to government. So we're still in quite narrow silos. If you ask the Treasury what it measures and what it likes to find out and how my homework gets marked, it's pretty narrow. The issue is as much across as it is depth of data, in my opinion.
Okay, Fiona, you wanted to come in?
Well, it's also about what's level and who is level. You can think about, you've talked about multidimensionality in terms of the economic, the health, the well-being, etc. But we've also got the multi-levels of who isn't level in the first place, who is unequal. The age, the sex, the gender, the ethnicity, the family structure, and all of that. And we don't measure all of that either. that some of it is measured well in some data sets, but it's not measured well enough across the board in the same way so that we could then link up those things. So it's not just about the different domains and the different locations. It's also about what are the different parts that we will need to level, and how are we measuring those so that we can work out when people are now level. And so that it's that as well that we don't do.
Chi, you've got your hand flat there. Please come on in.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a really fascinating discussion. I just wanted to give, I think there's many, probably raised more questions than answers, but just to give one example, during the COVID pandemic, ongoing COVID pandemic, and how useful and important it was to be able to take Google's location travel data and know how as they call non-medical interventions, lockdowns and restrictions impacted travel and travel and movement, actually. And I do think we need to think through kind of some of the implications of that, because I'm not a great fan of Google having vast access to how we all travel and move, but it was incredibly useful then. And again, I suppose to my point that we don't seem to have, if you like, a public kind of data sort of framework or sort of ethical basis to enable us to pull out sort of policy implications. And then to the point that a number of people have made, I think, again, during COVID, no, we didn't know the ethnicity often of those who, of those who were being vaccinated or those who were being getting COVID. And some of the groups who were the least likely to want to least, who were the most concerned or mistrustful of vaccines, were also mistrustful of sharing their data and with government. And so again, I guess this goes back to the key point that I see, is that we need, and I also think that point about scaling data is important, because we've got to have data sets. That was one of the great things for the European Union in a way. You've got to have data sets that have the same sort of definitions all the way through. But we also need a coherent sort of framework for how we collect data and how we store it and how we share it.
Cool, thank you. Let me shift this slightly, in that we seem to, I mean, she alluded to this early in her initial comments with regard to, we seem to live in an era that is seemingly less and less about data and facts, right? And whether it be fake news or, and in this kind of, we seem to be entering an era of narrative where, and Mike, see, this is not meant to be a pop at the current government, but whether it be about $350 million a week to the NHS, or Make America Great Again, or building a wall, or whatever, that these very easily digestible and understood narrative seem to carry a massive amount of influential power, and that, if you will, for lack of a better phrase, the good guys and all their data sets and whatnot seem to not be, and so I'm wondering, it's almost a kind of question as to, given how big of an agenda and how old of an agenda leveling up is data really, is data enough, or is there a way that data and maybe particularly the application of data science can actually help to build a story, build a narrative, build a case that can actually shine a light towards leveling up, and perhaps maybe we can get into what leveling up might be. Anyone willing to fight on the case? Oh, fantastic. Urvashi, please let us know about how data will save us.
I'll tell you, I'll give you my perspective. You're absolutely right. And this is why I said that one of the key audiences of any work we do on data and leveling up has to be the public. And I feel that, we must never give up on trying to have a fact-based narrative, except that those facts hardly ever reach the public, and it's an important job for all of us to make statistics, real-time data, whatever you call it, even data science, make it accessible and communicative to the public. And one of the key things, at least in my personal view, that Sir Ian Diamond, for example, did as part of the first 18 months of the pandemic, is get out there every single day to tell a story about what was going on with the numbers. It's not just the numbers; these are people behind those numbers, and I think that is an extremely important part of telling a story about leveling up. And at an official level, this is very much at the forefront of our data strategy. So the spatial data unit that has been set up in DLAG is not just going to create beautiful dashboards and traffic lights, but talk about what it means for a place and the people in those places.
Fantastic. Before we continue, if anyone has any questions now, we can start to take them right here in the front. Oh, we need a microphone down here first. Oh, you're being gazumped. Sorry. No, go ahead. Yeah.
You've all kind of touched on it a little bit, but I work in education, and it strikes me that, with data is all around us, and one of the main jobs of a teacher...
Sorry, can you hold on for a second? Can you hear the question being asked in the audience? You can't, okay. Can we get another mic? Or you could take my mic if needs be.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll start again. I suppose the role of a teacher, or in education in general, is to prepare young people for their futures. It's to make them understand the world around them. And data obviously is increasing tenfold, and it's playing a massive part in young people's lives. Yet data science is not on the curriculum. Mm-hmm. I guess the first time people might study this might be the time that they go to university, and that's only for the privileged people, right? So I guess it's a bit of a leading question, I guess, but should part of the levelling up agenda be that data science, AI, be a fundamental part of young people's education right from primary school upwards?
Yes, and we can make it easier because we don't have to frame it in those terms. So we looked at this in geography. So geography has a long history of teaching really tedious statistical tests to students to bore them for the rest of their life. And the question is, why are you doing this? Why not just trying to incorporate into the curriculum like use of visualization, use of data? Because you don't have to teach them the stuff behind it. What you need to teach them is that data is useful and exciting. You don't need to teach a statistic test to demonstrate that. In fact, that's the worst way to demonstrate it. You just get them handling data. So absolutely, trying to embed it, but it's quite difficult. But partly because not all teachers are technologically savvy, and even if they are, their institutions don't necessarily have the computational support to do things. But there are brilliant examples of it, like geographers again in UCL, and the sort of the just mapping things, mapping census data, and then you're having conversations around the use of different people living in different places. So I think education is utterly important in this day and age. In fact, this is a bit of a tangent. I think increasingly universities are getting it wrong. We place so much emphasis on research. Actually, the critical thing in our current society is about teaching people critical reason, because otherwise we're stuffed as a society, in this kind of untruth world. So yes, absolutely.
Can we actually take a few just to try and get as much material for us?
Yeah.
Please.
Hi, Brian Walker from Newcastle University. Is that too loud?
Are you hearing the question? You are. Great. Thanks.
Great. I mean, I guess I'm picking something up from Henry's introductory remarks. And we're very focused at the minute on public policy informed by data. But you could argue that the greatest advances of data science have actually been commercial companies who've exploited data science to their benefit. And you could argue that the greatest inequality to unlock all the rest is productivity and prosperity. And that actually, my question to the panel is your thoughts on how we can use data to unlock more directly than through informing national public policy, the prosperity of a region. I'm looking at Henry because I think he may have thoughts on this. And I would just frame this because we're sitting in the building that houses the National Innovation Centre for Data, which has set about exemplifying how we might empower companies to perform better as a result of insights of their data.
Henry, you ready?
After that horribly leading question, would you like me to have a go at answering? Thank you, Prof. There is a recognition of exactly that in the region. You know, well, certainly I think across the whole of the northeast, but in the north of Tyne, which is Newcastle, Northumberland, North Tyneside, there's cross-party, cross-cabinet recognition of the fact that empowering our businesses, our companies, the commercial operators in this region with the ability to understand the potential of big data and use that to their own advantage to improve their productivity is a really fundamental part of the next stage of our economy. I mean, that is the reason why we've invested in NICD, for example, along with the university, city council and others. So I think that's absolutely right. I mean, given I've got the floor, I've been really wrestling with the last bit of discussion, which I thought was fascinating, and really applaud the levelling up, the sense that you'd have long-term missions that you'd take seriously and you would put some metrics around and you would, if you like, accept the premise that inequality exists and there is a geographical basis to it and something needs to be done and it needs to go across 2-3 spending rounds. Absolutely great. And the short step to the tyranny of the league table, so to be slightly provocative about it, if you're a mayor, any of them, you want to be judged on the basis of the strategy and the manifesto you put together and be elected or de-elected by the public on that basis, not held to account by the same set of metrics that everybody else is, because that isn't really devolution. So there's a bit of that. I think there's a real tension in there that has to, and probably where we end up is somewhere in the middle, isn't it? But that I think is really fundamental to the discussion so far. Sorry, that was way off piste, but hopefully a part answer to your first question. And just an observation on what's been said so far.
Cool, thank you, Henry. I think we had, we have one there.
Thank you. Gemma Selby, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. My question's about how we go about breaking down the silos. So obviously we've all mentioned that everyone's dealing with data in slightly different ways. How do we work together to achieve our collective goals? Apologies, that's a really big question, but more how do we work together better?
Fiona, please.
I think that it was a conversation that I was having earlier in Outside, is that we need to bring the public along with us and understanding the purpose behind what their data is going to be used for and how it's going to be done. In Nordic countries, there isn't, everything is linked together. That you have one person and absolutely all of your data, it doesn't matter whether it's health, whether it's economics, whether it's your school education or everything, it's all joined together and you're just a person and all your data. But we haven't got that in this country. We haven't got that background. We haven't got the public's support for that. And we need to think, we need to bring the public with us in terms of understanding that actually the data that we can make better insights into people's lives and improve people's lives better if we explain what we're going to use their data for, whether that's the data that the businesses collect or whether it's the data on an individual. And I think that actually that we're slightly missing that in terms of the debate and thinking about how and why we can join these things up. Because unless we explain why we want to join things up, we will never have the public's permission to do so, and then you'll always end up with the front page, and how it can go wrong. And we're risk averse because we don't want that as the reaction, because that could put us back decades. So I think that it's about that narrative about what joining up and breaking down those silos can benefit. How can we benefit as a society by doing that? And we won't break down those silos until we can do that.
Talia, you have a lot of experience working within government and advocating for digital and data and things. What can be done to try and make a big difference here?
Well, it's really, to that specific point, it is quite hard because we live in a data economy at the moment, and the public sector, most of the organisations were set up before data was useful, before anyone spotted that even for an organisation. So we work closely with, as I said, Ordnance Survey, but the Land Registry as well, the Valuation Office Agency that sets the business rates and council tax rates, all kind of the main location data agencies. They culturally and organisationally haven't really ever had the need to think about the value of their data for other purposes apart from what their main objectives are. So it is quite difficult to break down those silos, particularly when it involves not just a cultural change, but probably some money to do so, to kind of invest in technology or people that can understand what you can do and kind of start to make those changes. What I was going to say was, I think that question is quite interesting, and Henry, your point as well, because I was just thinking about the way that we tend to answer questions about, you know, how can you break down silos? What is the main, what are the priorities for data to support levelling up? Because I'm responsible for delivering something, I tend to think about things in quite a practical way. And it's incredibly hard to answer that question in quite a blanket way because in advance of actually kind of setting out what the missions and the pillars are for levelling up, and I've actually said that that's the kind of next task of that policy team, I don't think it's that possible to identify kind of 1, 2, 3, however many sets of data or approaches that you might take, because it just becomes kind of meaningless, because it's such hard work to change the approach, to get access to data that you don't have at the moment, especially if the public sector hold it. You have to kind of define quite tightly what you want to achieve in order to win the data battle there. And I think, Henry, your point about kind of how do we overcome that tension between, you know, the next step to the tyranny of the league tables, which I'm slightly subject to at the moment, given my minister is Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you know that's been a recent discussion in amongst civil servants. But then how do you test that levelling up is successful if you can't compare the impacts across regions? Because but I completely agree, you might not want to go down that route, and it might be meaningless in the context of the relative improvements for a particular location. So I can understand that.
As an American, I can't help but to wonder if we should go about establishing a Department of Homeland Data or having a data czar or something like that, just because, you know, but aside from this, the half joking about that, I mean, is it something that actually, because what we're hearing about is lots of silos, you know, is that, I mean, does that idea make any sense about having, if nothing else, I suppose it would make much more visible that data is important and that we've got to do a much better job of collecting it, protecting it, so on and so forth. Any thoughts there? And if not, we'll move on to the next question.
I think there are specific areas that could be developed to underpin a more coherent approach. So, for example, it's been mentioned data ethics and privacy. You know, what are the concerns that are going to be faced by the public if they suddenly realise that the government or the public sector is using their data for things that they didn't realise? How do we spot the fact that those might arise as concerns? What do we say about that? How do we explain the use of that gives people the confidence that their data is going to be well used? So that's kind of an example of something that can be identified ahead of time, and probably if we come up with a reasonable, coordinated, credible explanation for that use and approach to that will serve, you know, the needs of data users and improvers across a different range of policy areas. But I'm not quite sure that there are so many areas like that. And I don't think a use case specific approach is a bad thing to improving data.
Okay, sorry, yes. No, I've had my back turned, apologies.
Hi, this is working, I can hear. Hi, Peter Wells, I'm a consultant, works with large organisations and governments on trustworthy use of data. I suppose I'm quite interested in some of the debate about and hearing that there's a local spatial data unit in DLUC based down in Whitehall, or a National Geospatial Commission with Talia down in the Cabinet Office, which I've been in. And I'm wondering, with an upcoming North East new devolution deal, should there be some devolution over control over data in there, funding and powers, so that the North East Combined Authority could make decisions about what's the framework and what the values of the North East group of people, how data should be used about them, how they could use it to level up within their spatial region, and what the panel's thoughts are about that.
I think what I'm going to do, because we are actually obviously running close to time here, First, let me just check with Vashi and Chi. Are you okay to hang on for a few more minutes? I don't want you to feel held hostage online whilst we run a little over time. Is that all right?
How many more? How many more minutes?
We're gonna
I need the data.
we're gonna try and cap this to 5 more minutes. Is that all right?
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So if we could, if we could actually perhaps ask a few questions to try and get them all in now. So if you wouldn't mind.
So far, we've covered social and economic sort of data, but we haven't really covered environmental data at all. From my point of view, I'm part of the government's Forestry and Woodland Advisory Committee, and I've just been asked to comment on local authorities producing strategies and joining them up. Effectively, there are two major options. Can we develop sort of cross-authority approaches, or can we even go for bioregional approaches? It seems to me that if we're starting to looking at bioregional approaches, then we should be able to start looking at much wider approaches in all the other spheres that data is starting to do. It might well be that utilising the environment, we have an opportunity to broaden the geographic, the data gathering, the regional, and the academic approaches.
Do you want to actually pass here? We're going to take a few to close, please.
I've got quite a simple question. I'm just an interested citizen. How do we use the data that we have locally to tell the best poverty story we can of the region so that we avoid slick southern councils telling a better poverty story, so once again the northeast lose out? How do we get a hold of this levelling up money without telling the best poverty story we possibly can?
Okay, interesting. We've got, wow, this is great that we have so many. Let's just get them all, and then we'll let the panel decide what they're going to pick and choose from. I don't want to quash people's enthusiasm here.
I thought I might have lost my opportunity to speak there. But great panel, by the way. So my business at Jackson Hogg, we spend a lot of time building data teams of data scientists and data engineers for a whole number of sectors. But I'm old enough to remember when data wasn't sexy and people didn't get excited about data. It was actually quite a dull thing back in the early 80s. But how do we get more, we talked about epidemiology, we talked about geography, how do we get more people excited about this subject and bring more people in? I guess there's an expansion generally of the first question, but that's just a general question to everyone.
Okay, cool. And I think we do have one more. Oh, two more. All right, quickly. Here we go. Make them quick.
I will do. I've got two questions. First of all, I thought there was a national data strategy by the government on gov.uk, is there not? And my second part is, how do we, looking at data, try and avoid bias from people when they're trying to tell the story from what the data is?
Okay, avoid. Back here.
Yeah, thanks. Just one quick one. So I guess inequality is ultimately a political problem, but I wonder if this framing of taking a data-driven approach is actually, well, I'm just interested in your reflections on whether that is actually stopping us from finding the most effective solutions rather than, so yeah, I'll just be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Okay, and then one final one in the back, I think. Oh, back there.
Basically, I am pursuing my master's in Newcastle University, and thanks to Newcastle University that some time ago I worked with NTCA on well-being purpose, and I think that well-being purpose is somewhat related to uplifting. So I would like to ask Mr. Henry that how well-being and their indicators, like indicators on discrimination in how the students study and their data, and also like examples of litter data. And so can we create a chain with small scale industries working on the data, collection of the data, and can we bring out a campaign or something for the universities, not only to like catch up with their alumni and just ask that what they are up to, so that we can get the data that how people approach life after completing their graduation, so that we can have actual data finding how the society is uplifting. And there is one question for Urvashi also, that like she said that we need to bring people and we need to open the files and the data to people. So can we have some sites or something where we can give the data to people and ask for their thoughts, that what are they okay with what we have found in the data, like they have some critical analysis on it, or like we can get something from there. And for one question for the madam from Parliament, that can we create some campaign or something which can uplift and bring people closer to the data, so that they can participate on open sources where they can give their analysis and their thoughts on what data we have collected till now, so that like combination of everything can create a huge lift in the upliftment of the data and like being on the next stage with the data. So these are all questions. I would be glad if someone answers. Thank you.
Okay. We're obviously not going to be able to answer every question from every panelist, given we've probably used up, 5 minutes already. But I mean, I grab out things. Any responses? I mean, Henry, you obviously mentioned in the last question. You don't have to answer that one in particular if you choose not to. Any reactions to what we've heard?
The issue about data scientists and suddenly data science is sexy and a new career for people. But as we've explained, the data science is not just about, if I turn around to people and say, oh, you're a data scientist, well, that's a lot like maths. I'll say, oh, no, I didn't like maths. That actually, it's about data visualization. It's about enabling people to be able to see their own data. It's so many more skills than just, those ideas around the analysis and the analytics of it. The politics will always take a metric and do whatever. Politicians are geographically based. They have to be, if they want to continue in Parliament, they have to be re-elected. The mayors have to be re-elected. People, that's just the society we live in. So I think that, but what you can do is try and make it so that the data on this issue of levelling up is available to people. And actually, it does link into the education question, that people are taught skills enough to enable them to see good quality data visualization and good quality understanding of data. There's a lot in the don't get me started on the financial education that we do for kids trying to understand APRs and all that sort of thing. So it's about that, I think. But data science is more than just that skill set, and we just need to enable more people to do it, because there is a dearth of data scientists. There's so many jobs vacant in this field that we could help, which would also then help with the levelling up agenda, because you can do data science anywhere. You don't have to be in London.
Cool.
She and Urvashi, you've got that.
Yes, I've got to go. I think just to emphasize, it's been interesting that this conversation has been about leveling up and data, but a lot of the issues that have come out are around data collection and data trust, as well as data skills. That points to the point. I think it's not. I wouldn't actually characterize it as being about bringing people with us. Neither would I. Perhaps not polarizingly say it's about taking the politics out of data, because actually, representing people, we represent people in a place, and people. Unless people have a sense of ownership and empowerment about their own data, they are going to mistrust how it is going to be used. And we have had so little, sort of absence of any kind of discussion or engagement or giving people control over their own data, that we're not. I mean, firstly, it's a total mess, and secondly, I don't think we're going to get out of that on a sort of use case based framework. We need principles, and people need to have kind of their rights on data and digital, and then it's but because of where we are with the data era, if you like, whilst we're doing that, we also need to be building the frameworks and the architectures that allow for the collection and sharing of data. And with that, I'm afraid I'm going to go. Still haven't voted, but expecting to soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chi. Urvashi.
Thank you very much. I'll try and respond to quite a few of the questions, if I remember them right. And first of all, to acknowledge that almost all of the questions are questions that we are thinking of and considering actively in our teams, in the task force, and with our Secretary of State. So it's reassuring to hear that in some ways, that we're hitting the right problems. In terms of what I was saying, the Spatial Data Unit and their work, especially with the ONS, will be very much about providing toolkits and frameworks to local areas and access, so that they can determine what data they want to visualize, how they want to present that data, how they want to tell the story. It's not about the center telling the story for every single place. And there's a real acknowledgement in very practical sense in what we are taking forward. So this is really about providing and helping and enabling local areas and building capability, which is very much going to be what we are going to be doing. In terms of, I think somebody asked, will the data-driven approach, is that the only thing? And it's come up a few times. First of all, I don't think that leveling up is a political problem. Spatial disparities, as we know, is a 40-year problem, entrenched. It's not just about regions, it's within regions. So it is a social problem. It's not just an economic problem. So I think a data-driven approach is not the only approach, but it needs to be part of the ecosystem. And that is what the white paper says, that it has to be one of the fundamental pillars, recognizable, and it has to be mainstreamed into everything that we do, not just in visualizing, but actually learning what's going on, evaluating properly, monitoring where money is going, what impact it is having in local areas.
Fabulous. Panelists, any final thoughts before we close?
Well, I mean, a lot of that's about measurement. I mean, data is also used for modelling as well. So I think there's a place for kind of prediction and modelling and understanding places. I think there's absolutely a place for theory. I read the white paper. I actually really like the white paper, and I think its goals are laudable. But it points out that Britain's one of the most unequal countries in the world. It rather brushes over that the party who was in power for the majority of that period is the same one writing the thing. And, one might question whether the kind of policies of marketisation are in fact the drivers of the problem. So you aren't necessarily going to solve it simply by more data alone. And I think the final point is, I think by implication, a lot of what we said is that the data we're talking about is numbers, basically a quantification. I think we have to be a bit careful about that. The data isn't just that. There's qualitative data as well, and that's really important. If you really want to capture, I don't know how deprivation of poverty or something is actually experienced by people on the ground. I'm not sure measurements are necessarily going to get you there. If you want to empathise with what it's like, again, I'm not sure a number's going to do that for you. So there are other types of data that should be employed in some of these narratives including to the general public.
Great. On that, Henry, Talia, Rich, Fiona, and Urvashi from down in London, thank you so much for joining us. Could we have a round of applause for our panel tonight? And can I thank all of you for your contribution and your engagement? It's actually been great to see. Normally, I'm often struggling to get questions asked, and we had more than really had time for. So our thanks to you, and a round of applause to yourselves, please. Okay, I think we are done. So thank you for joining us for this first data debate. Thanks to the National Center for Innovation Data, and to the Alan Turing Institute, and thanks as well to Rachel Franklin and Angela Craggs. I don't know if Angel's still here, for organizing this thing tonight. And thanks again for joining us. Cheers, everyone.